You're listening to the Regeneration Rising podcast, a podcast from the Quivira Coalition about the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of agrarians in the United States. Each episode will explore what it means to work in regenerative agriculture, how people came to choose this as their livelihood, and why it's important to them and the future. We hope to build a foundation for a strong community of future agrarians and land stewards with a regenerative approach to community, relationships, and the land.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Regeneration Rising. I'm Taylor Muglia, and we have a fantastic episode for you today. First, I wanted to share some things going on here at the Quivira Coalition. So, believe it or not, we're already gearing up to hire apprentices for 2024. To learn more about the new agrarian program and participating mentor sites, join us for our NAP 101 calls in September, October, and November. And these are great calls to bring questions to. So it'll be hosted by myself and my colleague, Lucas Sampson, up in Montana. And we just go through all the sites and explain more about the program. And it's a really good time. So if you're considering applying, I would highly recommend attending. You can register at quiviracoalition.org and find our events page. And applications for our program open November 1st through December 15th. If you are at all considering applying, maybe you have some questions or concerns, not only do I recommend attending one of those calls, but you can always feel free to reach out to us. You can email newagrarian@quiviracoalition.org, and one of us will get back to you and we can help you talk through if this program seems like a good decision for you and what sites might be a good fit. So feel free to always reach out. Also, so we have the Regenerate Conference coming up on November 1st through 3rd, and there are discounts available for beginning farmers and ranchers, as well as students studying fields related to, pretty broadly, anything in agriculture or conservation. So, and as we'll mention later in the episode, we'll be hosting a really fun beginning farmer and rancher social and career fair on Thursday night of the conference. So we really hope you'll join us. Okay, on to today's episode. I'll talk with Executive Director of Poudre Valley Community Farms, Stacy Lishka, and National Young Farmers Coalition Western Organizing Manager, Evanne Caviness. We discussed this amazing project I'm so excited about that links young farmers and ranchers with land here in northern Colorado, which can be an extremely difficult place to find affordable land access. And we talk about what can go right and wrong with cooperative land leasing. I really enjoyed our conversation. It digs into the nuances of land access, and I think it's just really helpful. And so thanks for joining us, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Evan, Stacy, thank you so much for joining us on Regeneration Rising.
It's wonderful to be here. I'm super excited to share our partnership with your listeners.
Yeah, so Stacy, I guess I would love to start with you first. Can you tell us a little bit about the origin story of Poudre Valley Community Farms, and what are the problems within agriculture and land access that led to its creation in the first place?
You bet. I think it's one of the most interesting and important parts of Poudre Valley Community Farms is really where we started. We are based in northern Colorado, and Poudre Valley Community Farms is a grassroots organization in the very truest sense of that word. Our organization started when a group of our community members, including a longtime farmer family in our community, kind of got together actually at our public library to talk about challenges for growing local food in northern Colorado. And Nick Kuntz and Katie Slota, who run Native Hill Farms, are the producers that were there, that were part of that conversation. And they stood up and basically told their story. They said over the 10 years that they had been running their business, they had to move their farm 8 different times, which means that they couldn't invest long-term in soil health and in understanding properties. They just couldn't get to the point where they could do that. And they had really hit a wall in terms of what kind of land they could afford. because so much land in northern Colorado, land is in such high demand for development of all varieties. And their story really isn't unique. That's the thing that we hear across the board for producers in this part of the state and really across the West, is that land access and water access that's both affordable and long-term and dependable is the biggest barrier to starting businesses, to growing businesses, to sustaining businesses. And the interesting part about what happened here in Fort Collins was that in that same room was a group of people who cared about where their food came from, and had financial resources to be able to support a program to build land access. And the passion with which Nick and Katie told their story and these folks' dedication really sort of lit a fire in our community to start this program that's focused on providing long-term affordable land, water, and infrastructure access. And our program has really grown from there, where folks who have financial resources are bringing them together. We're pulling those pieces together. We're leveraging that with other creative funding mechanisms to purchase land, to lease land, and to connect producers to private landowners to provide land and water access.
Awesome. Yeah, then that brings me to my next question. So you've described yourself as a conduit between landowners and land seekers. And so can you describe a little bit more about like the structure of the organization? Like what do you do? Do you own all of the land that you lease out? Is it kind of a patchwork? And how, I guess, yeah, I want to picture sort of what your role is and what the role of the landowner and the land seeker and how those work in.
Yeah. At the beginning, our model or idea was really to purchase land, to bring the funds of those folks who really were invested in where their food comes from together to help purchase land for the benefit of our producers. So that was the first step. We did that work. We were able to purchase a piece of land and put a conservation easement on that land. And through the Colorado state tax laws, we could recoup a lot of the purchase price of that land to be able to take that money then and reinvest it in other work. And I think that's a great model. But what we realized during that process is that's only one model. And because land is so expensive here, if we sort of stuck only with a land purchase model, it meant that we could only help a pretty small number of producers. And we had lots of producers, and we still have lots of producers reaching out to us on a regular basis to look for land access and look for land of a variety of different types. So we sort of expanded the portfolio or the ways that we access land, and I think really got very creative about that. So we own one piece of land. We also lease a number of properties from our city, the City of Fort Collins Natural Areas Department. And on those lands, we try to create opportunities for shared access so that we have multiple producers on those properties, and we can really look for the synergies between the ways they are growing food to help provide conservation benefits on those properties. So that second way that we sort of provide access is through these leased and then subleased properties with shared access. And then the third way is that we try to really connect landowners and land seekers in whenever we have those opportunities. So we will often have folks who own land and would like someone to be farming it for a variety of reasons reach out to us to say, hey, can you help us find somebody that's a good fit? And as I said, we also have those land seekers reaching out to us. And so we sometimes play matchmaker in that way. And I think there's even more creativity out there in terms of the future of like how we could continue to provide access. But we really try to look for like the best circumstances for the particular land seeker. In our world, the producers are first. And we also recognize that producers need different kinds of resources. They're looking for different things. And so we really try to match the opportunity with what they're looking for. Some of them want to own land. Some of them want to lease land. Some of them are looking for a place to just kind of try something out. And so that is just sort of like different opportunities for different people in different circumstances.
Yeah, it's so variable. Like I always find land access to be it's talked about in such a like a simple way, like we need to get young farmers land access. But when it comes to actually doing that, you're not talking just about land, you're talking about the water, the barns, the like housing, like the, tenure situation, if they're going to lease it, if they're going to lease to own. It's just such a complicated thing. And a lot of, you could have two cattle producers that are super similar, and they want completely different things. So yeah, I'm super curious about, well, first of all, I wanted to ask you too, what's the percentage of vegetable operations versus livestock operations in your program?
Yeah, so right now, we serve 10 producers, and it's about half and half, about a mix of small and large stock livestock producers, and then about half vegetable producers. So we really have an open door, and I think that's really one of the benefits of these shared properties is that we have places where we are doing, for the health of the land, we are doing both grazing and more intensive vegetable production kind of in those same places. Yeah, and I also wanted to sort of add, Taylor, to what you said earlier, which is that those desires also change over time. Someone who's in the first year of starting a business or the first several years of starting a business, they might have one view of what they want it to look like. And then as that develops, they might change those views. So that's really where we are looking to build long-term relationships with people. We aim for 5-10 year leases with folks so that we can be there as a solid partner to them through that whole period. And it's good for us too, right? Because when we've got folks who are invested in a piece of land and want to be there and know they can be there for 5 or 10 years or even longer, they're willing to put the time and effort into understanding that property, into improving the properties, into trying to achieve some of those conservation goals that are important for us too.
Yeah, and I also think too, I'm imagining there are situations too where people get a lease and then they're like, this is way harder than I thought, or this is way different than I thought it was going to be, or my financial situation has changed, or my family situation has changed, and we have to pivot, And so I think that's the cool part about what you're doing is it's a really dynamic and you work together with producers, because it's like you can't just have a young farmer, get them land, and we check that box, we fix that problem. It's so dynamic. So
Yeah.
I can imagine that's always really challenging.
It is. And that's why that's really we've started to think about the ways we interact with producers as sort of a pipeline, right? Where we've got folks coming into that pipeline at all different stages, and how do we help support them differently based on where they are. And one of the things that we have developed sort of in the middle part of it, feels like there are beginning farmer programs out there, ways to help folks learn how to farm. And then we had a lot of opportunities for folks who were established producers to sort of take their business and put it on this piece of property and have that long-term land and water access. But the middle of the pipeline was a little weak here, especially in Northern Colorado. So we worked with another organization called the Northern Colorado Foodshed Project to develop a farm accelerator program. And so it's basically the idea that someone would come into this program who's had some experience farming. They maybe had that in their background, or they may have worked on another farm, or, they maybe were part of a beginner farmer and rancher program. And they really wanted to build a business here in Northern Colorado. And that's what this program is designed to do. It gives really affordable land and water access for 3 years and equipment support and things like that, as well as training. So things like business training, food safety training, the stuff that if you're working on a farm, it's sort of someone else's responsibility to deal with all of those parts, right? But if you want to own your own farm, you've got to know how to do that stuff. So it's a 3-year program that operates on one of our properties that is really designed to take folks and accelerate their business from this beginning phase to a phase where they have the foundation to be sustainable into the long term.
Wow, that is so cool.
So it's just, we're really trying to think about that pipeline and how do we get folks through moving from step to step and support them along the way. Because exactly like you said, it's not a static thing. You don't like become a farmer and then you're a farmer for like in the same way for years over time. So
absolutely.
That's one of the things that I think through our partnerships and through some of the work that we are doing directly, we're really trying to just like solidify that pipeline here in Northern Colorado.
I want to bring Evan in. This is an awesome partnership that you two have formed. And so, Evan, you're a cattle rancher. You have an operation with your husband Tyson and all the kiddos, and lease a piece of land through this program. Evan, can you kind of go into how you found the program, how you ended up being a lessee?
Yeah, absolutely. So my husband and I are both originally from the Four Corners region, specifically Bayfield. And that is where we started our business. That is where we really foresaw ourselves being forever. No reason to move. But I worked for the National Young Farmers Coalition at that time as the Colorado organizer. And I went to a conference at the Old Fort, and it was a gathering of different incubator farms and accelerator models and the such. And that's where I met Carly Donahue, who's the executive director of the Northern Colorado Foodshed Project. And she was great. I loved hearing about the program. We just started to kind of get in touch. She told me vaguely about, oh, there's this woman named Stacy and there's this thing. And, but it was very much just kind of on the periphery, something cool to know about for my work. And then my daughter, who she's now 18 months, but she was a tiny baby when that happened. And we learned shortly after that she was deaf. And immediately as parents, that just really shifted our worldview, our life plan, because living rurally is certainly great if you are not needing anything extra. And the truth of the matter was that our daughter had audiological needs. She had a need to be a part of her community of other deaf individuals, and that wasn't to be had. So then it became, okay, so where do we go? Well, the answer in Colorado is Denver. That's where it's very concentrated with the pediatric audiologists and the deaf community and all these things that we wanted for her. And very quickly realized, wow, we can't have cattle in Denver. It's just not going to happen. And we considered for a time, do we sell the herd? Like, is this a make or break situation? And just realized it was going to break our hearts. It was going to be really, really not something we wanted to do. And that's actually when I remembered Carly and the conversation we had. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to reach out to Stacy, and I'm just going to ask and introduce myself, talk about the situation. And Stacy was immediately lovely and welcoming and kind. Poudre Valley Community Farms seemed like such an excellent fit. And then it became a matter of, okay, understanding your needs as a producer. What are the bottom lines for you to be able to do what you need to do? And also, how flexible are you? And to be honest, we were like, anything. We will essentially bend over backwards and make it work. We just need grass. We need grass to graze. And Stacy was lovely, and she first connected me with a really great property owner. That particular situation didn't work out. However, she didn't give up on me, and Poudre Valley Community Farms didn't give up on us. And we ended up on the prior property, which is one of the newer properties through the city of Fort Collins and is very different. And I think in some ways, on a standard piece of paper, less desirable for some folks because it's currently a year-to-year lease or a service agreement with the city. And, although that's a bit disconcerting to think, wow, that's not a lot of time to have certainty of where you're going to be, we didn't have another choice. We didn't have the capital to go buy land. We didn't have the connections in the community to get hooked up with someone who had land to lease. And we had a timeline of a surgery for our daughter in months. And we needed to be settled. So we said, you know what, we're willing to be your guinea pigs. We are willing to fly this plane as it's being built and let us be that person. And I'm so glad that we did, because although it's still not ideally we'd love to have a long-term lease. We truly feel Poudre Valley Community Farms has been really responsive to our needs and great at helping us advocate for those with the city and just being somebody who's on our side every step of the way. And honestly, like, this wouldn't have worked out. Being able to meet our daughter where she's at and then also still run our business would not have happened had I not run into Carly and then known about Stacy. And I feel very fortunate that I had those connections, and very fortunate that this organization existed.
Absolutely. Yeah, Stacy, I want to hear too about your side. Like, just this is kind of a case study of each side. What was your side of that process? Like, how was that, and how is that looking at land seekers and playing that matchmaker process? Like, how did it go for you in the case of Evan?
Evan really did a great job of describing all, the detail, all of like how that process played out. And that's often the way the process plays out for us. Because we try to be a really flexible organization, it's different every time. And there are details that are unique to every circumstance. I think the two things that are really, really important, and Evan really hit on both of these, is first, trust. We really see this work as relational, right? It's about people as much as it's about the food that's produced. It's about understanding who people are and understanding how we can help them, not how we can shape them into something that meets our ends, right? But really trying to meet folks where they are in the very sort of like truest sense of the word. So that foundation of trust and building those relationships is super, super critical. And it takes a lot of time and effort to do that. And that's wonderful, right? That's one of the parts of my job that I appreciate and I really enjoy the most. And then the other part of it, and Evan used the word flexible, and I think that is just such a perfect description, is that from all of our sides, the recipe for success here is flexibility. And that's really the thing, like, to me, that's the key characteristic I'm looking for in any producer when I start to talk with them. And Evan and Tyson just had it in spades, not just in terms of a situation where they were, really had a timeline on looking for access. But when we started to talk about long-term goals and how we're building towards something and really building this process and this airplane as we fly it, they were always, and all of our producers that, these sort of long-term relationships, I think the thing that makes this work is everybody's willing to pitch in. Everybody's willing to say, how can I help get from where we are, a 1-year lease, to where we want to be, which is a longer term lease? How do we build the case for that? How do we demonstrate to the city that there are really, really good outcomes from this work that helps them understand and feel comfortable with a longer term lease? So I think that, that flexibility is often what we're looking for in our producers. And it comes in a variety of different forms. But those are the two things. And I think especially on properties where we have shared land access, that flexibility extends beyond the relationship with PVCF, right? It's the relationship with the other producers on the property. And Evan can tell you more specifically about what her experience has been at Prior, but in general, our folks are learning from each other. They're sharing the burden, they're sharing the load of managing properties, and they are creating this social network that helps support them in their work as well, right? It takes away some of that isolation that's maybe conventionally or traditionally part of agriculture. So, I think that that flexibility is just super key to making it all work.
Yeah. Yeah, I would love to dive into this a little more. We've talked about on this podcast before the idea of just different, like looking at land access in a different way instead of just, purchasing land and having a farm, like maybe how can we share? And I think this is kind of the answer that a lot of people are proposing in this space recently. And I'm kind of trying to understand, like, why is that not happening? It's probably not happening for some valid reasons already. Like if it's not already naturally happening, like what I'm saying is like working together on a farm, different enterprises sharing a piece of land, like it must be challenging. And so let's talk about it. Like what exactly is challenging? So Evan, I'd love to hear from you. like in your experience and in, conversations with others and just in your work with young farmers too, what are successes and challenges of sharing land? Like what are some topics that maybe we're not talking about enough?
Yeah, absolutely. I think coming back to this point about flexibility, but also it's such a reciprocal relationship, sharing land. In a sense, it's almost like forced familial relationships. And I say that because, people's farm operations are very deeply personal. They come to it from places of serious like conviction and belief in why they're doing it because, Lord knows a lot of us don't do it just for the money. There's not a ton of money to be had in farming. But that being said, it's hard to share land with others when you think of it from the perspective of like we all have our own interests that we're thinking about. But what I really challenge other folks to think about when they're considering sharing land as a model of land access is that you kind of have to pivot your perspective from what serves me, what serves my business to more of a collaborative and like putting others sometimes before yourself. And I think that's a tough pill to swallow sometimes. I can speak for our own situation coming onto the property. We have a wonderful, I think there's 4 of us now on prior, really 3 who are actively invested in the long term, but it went from our wonderful co-producer Kristen kind of flying solo to all of a sudden, oh wow, here's 2 new people and 20 plus giant animals that we now have to share outbuildings and infrastructure and schedules and all these things. And I want to say, like, I have appreciated and Tyson has appreciated Kristen as a person and as a producer in that we very much, although like we don't always have the same priorities because we're different businesses, we, I think, have done a very gracious job on both ends of being there for one another. And, on Kristen's end, that has looked like we had a lot of trouble with the electric fence when we first came on because it hadn't been maintained or used properly for a couple years. And so there was like, we had cows getting out and it was extremely stressful. We don't live near our property where we lease. We're like a 15-minute drive away. We had just moved. We had 2 small children. And Kristen really came in handy of like showing up on short notice to help us wrangle cattle, literally chase them down someone's driveway to get them back into the fence. And then I think that we do our due diligence on our end of, Tyson took his truck and rented a trailer to go help Kristen pick up hay recently. He's more than happy to help her move a refrigerator, and it's also like checking on one another's stock when someone needs to be out of town. So the beauty of it is that, like, if you're willing to take a step back from the individualistic mindset of me and mine and what's best for me, and think of it more as, how can I be of service to someone else who has just as deep of convictions about this as me, albeit even if not for the same reasons, right? And coming from that mindset of the collective and helping one another has really, I think, made it work for us and is a reason why we have had success with the shared model. So I would just recommend, if anyone's considering this, you just it's like with any relationship, right? You have to give and as much as you take, and if not, more than you take to make this be a successful relationship.
Yeah, and it's like not keeping score too. What you're saying is just like jumping in when you're needed, and that goodwill just builds over time. And that's so cool. And that, that's solving a major problem of every young farmers is like, how do we go out of town? How do we like deal with balancing the kids' schedules? Like, how do we still have a social life? Like, maybe we can step in for each other and help each other achieve that, but it doesn't come free. You have to help other people do that too. Yeah. So Stacy, if you want to jump into, you have so much experience, mediating these situations, and you like have the unique perspective of watching it play out. And I'm sure like listen to a lot of the frustration and a lot of the, on the other end, the appreciation. So yeah, I'd love to hear your perspective, like what works and what doesn't work about sharing land.
Yeah, for sure. And, again, I'm going to totally piggyback on what Evan said and use her analogy of a family, right? I grew up in northern Wisconsin in the 80s. And so lots of family farms, right? And that's all changed over time. And I think as folks are trying to get into farming now who are maybe moving to a different place from where their family is, they maybe don't have farming in their history, they don't have land access, through their family connections or that sort of thing, it puts folks in the place where they're trying to recreate what happened on a family farm, but in a different location, that they don't have those social connections. And so, just like it's wonderful and hard to have a really close family that supports you in all of those needs that you have, it's like that on these shared properties too. And I think that, again, that willingness to contribute, that willingness to see that we are all working together, even if we're all coming at these things from a little different angle, like we are working toward the same long-term goal, which is to have these sustainable businesses that are sustainable financially, and they're sustainable in terms of everyone's mental and physical health and well-being, and that they like really connect people back together, right? Like that, they're really like recreating that idea of a family farm. I would say that it's not easy. It's like takes a lot of work. And I know that, in the sort of the ethos of farming for land access, it's like, oh, well, let's just share, right? And that sounds beautiful. And it takes a whole bunch of the work and the flexibility and the mentality that Evan described to make that happen. And that is a lot of the role that we play, Poudre Valley Community Farms, like across the different properties where we have shared access, is that we're trying to sort of facilitate a lot of this stuff. But I think just like any, family situation, communication, assuming the best intent of people instead of the worst intent, and like that gratitude and that sort of understanding of this, what it allows everyone to do, I think is really, big key parts. And also recognizing the fact that there will be times of year, July, August, and September are really hot and really hard to cooperate. And just being able to say, like, we're going to stick through this period, and then we're going to do the repair work, and we're going to keep getting better about how we do things, in the season where people have a little more mental space and energy to like deal with that. I describe a lot of times the work that we do as sort of a spiral where we're getting a little bit closer to doing it right and having it be smooth and sort of easy for everybody. Every time we go around, every time we come up to a circumstance, we get a little bit better. And I think that idea of learning from what we've been doing, what's worked and what hasn't, and like coming back to those conversations when folks have cool heads, that's been a really big part in the process for PVCF to be able to like make these situations work. There's always bumps, and it's not easy. And it is not a circumstance that's like meant for every farmer. You have to be able to come to it with those characteristics and that mentality that Evan described. Because otherwise, if everybody is sort of on their own and looking for the best for themselves and sort of moving away from those shared goals, that's where things get to those fractures. We can't move past them. So, yeah, I will say it's hard and fun, because to be able to see, the connection between the different producers in terms of what they can provide for each other and what that means for the land it's amazing. And to be able to eat the food that comes from these circumstances and like feel like I'm making a difference in our real community, it's so fulfilling and it's worth it, but it's not easy.
I'm curious, like Stacy, your background is in government, and sort of that's your groundwork. I can just see it being so helpful as the bridge in the situation. And then Evan, you're working as the Western Organizing Manager for Young Farmers Coalition. So I'd love if each of you could say sort of how your experience in your either previous jobs or your off-farm job helps in this relationship.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in first and just say, I think the obvious is that I was extremely fortunate to be a part of a larger network of folks committed to a shared goal of improving land access. At Young Farmers, I come at it from the policy advocacy perspective of I'm really trying to work with farmers to help them understand that there's power in their stories and experience, and that they can share those stories and experiences with lawmakers to make changes. Like that's really the goal I'm working with in my off-farm job. But also it's how I got to meet the right people to even know that this was happening, right? And that I could be a part of something bigger. I just think Stacy and I have had some really, really amazing conversations where we've kind of, I think at the same time, come to realize that the work Poudre Valley Community Farms has been doing has really been around land access, although I don't know that that was necessarily always like a very, clear mission, or like we used to be a cooperative and now we've kind of made this transition to nonprofit. And we have had, as like Poudre Valley Community Farms, to kind of define, like, why are we doing this? What are our priorities? And like, how does that shape how we operate? And, Stacy and I have had just such really thought-provoking conversations about it. And I've been really grateful to be able to speak from, what I've learned from others through my network with young farmers, even though I think every creative land access model is so different because they just have to be. But there's always something to be gleaned and something to be learned. And I hope that I'm right in saying that I've been able to bring that perspective into Poudre Valley Community Farms, which I'm just so grateful that Stacy and the other producers have been receptive to kind of that mindset, because I recognize I'm new, and sometimes it's you get nervous being the new person in the room, not wanting to overstep, but like I love to name the work that we're accomplishing and say, this is an example of something like that works and something that is problem solving in an incredibly difficult situation for land access. Like Northern Colorado is just such a tough place to be right now. For anyone, and let alone if you need to like have land. And it's something really cool too that I then bring back to my work at Young Farmers, because when we're making these big policy asks with lawmakers, I speak to my experience and I'm like, hey, like this is something I'm a part of, that, if you support this bill or, this campaign that I'm working on, like you vote this in, it's literally directly creating a pathway to fund organizations like ours, in the case of some of the work we're doing right now.
Yeah. And I think just to sort of add on that, Taylor, my background is in conservation, and I worked for 20-ish years in government, right? And a big piece of our land access program, our solution to this challenge of land access, really crisis of land access in Northern Colorado, is working with governments because they own and hold a lot of land, right? And those primarily are held for open space and conservation goals, right? And so being able to be sort of bring that understanding of how those processes work and what the conservation goals are to these conversations and be the translator between those two, I think has been really a big part of building that partnership that, again, provides so much land access for us. And I've been able to learn from the personal stories and the experiences of folks like Evan and our other producers who just bring that passion and that worldview. But for so long, the story, at least sort of in the like land management world, has been like conservation and agriculture are working against each other, right? And they're like, farmers just want to farm every tillable inch. They don't care how much it ruins the land. And then conservationists are buying up all the land and don't want to let it be used and don't understand the value of agriculture and the value of an understanding of the land that farmers might hold. And so like the story has been like, we are working at odds to each other. And in reality, in this case, I think we're really clearly proving that we can work together for the benefit of everybody. But it takes the translation, right? It takes, I'm looking at the world from this perspective and you're looking at the world from this perspective. And that's where I think both, my background in kind of walking in both of these worlds, as well as the perspective of Poudre Valley Community Farms, are like sort of the role of us of being, I describe us often as like grease between wheels, right? Like we're trying to make it a little bit easier for everybody to understand each other and talk to each other and work together. And that is because we sort of bring that shared perspective. I think that's why we've been successful at building that partnership. And it's folks like Evan who can tell her story, and folks like our partners at the City of Fort Collins Natural Areas who are willing to listen and think about doing things differently than the way they might have done, or questioning that sort of conventional story about conservation and agriculture, that's really making this work. And again, it comes so much down to trust and relationships and flexibility. And that feels like really just the core of the human part of the work that we do. And the fact that Evan can help then, folks like Evan and others can help us be a model for other places and share what have we learned, how has it gone totally off the rails, how has it been really successful, what surprised us. I think that's the part that we're really excited to be able to try to think about how we can influence this question on a bigger scale.
I'm actually personally really excited about the project. You guys are a county over from where I live. And I'm watching your organization build and serve a lot of the needs that we actually have in our county. And I'm kind of thinking, a lot of the problems that we have are around, I think there is a conversation about we need animals on the land, and they can be a really strong tool. And I think a lot of land managers, and especially on government-owned land, they're like, they'll sometimes come to our young farmers community and be like, does anybody want to custom graze this? And the problem is there's no infrastructure for those businesses to thrive in the first place. And so there's a lot of young farmers that are like, I totally would, but I have no foundation. I have no place to keep my livestock, no corrals, no barns, no home place, So even if I did, and it's such a valuable tool that I think can bring revenue into a young farmer's business by doing that custom grazing, I could just see that as an opportunity that you guys are sort of building the foundation for. Like Evan's cattle could potentially go be grazing on another lease that for really targeted grazing, achieving some really amazing results in a situation like that because they have the foundation. So anyway, I can see that filling a niche in a lot of communities.
Yeah. And Taylor, you hit what you just described there is the learning that Poudre Valley Community Farms has done over these years, right? Mm. When we started, even our mission statement was we provide land access. It was just about a parcel on a map, right? And then we realized, well, you can't grow a whole lot here if you only have soil, right? Yes. You have to also have water. And then depending on who the producers are and what their background might be and their other, they also need infrastructure, and the amount of infrastructure and the kind of infrastructure depends both on what the goals are for the property and the sort of the food production and the conservation goals. And it also depends a lot on the background of our producers. And so that's, I think, when we started out, it was sort of like a one size fits all model was what we had in our minds. Mm. And I think, a lot of our partners had that in their mind too, right? This is a simple solution. People just need a square on a map.
Yes.
And it's so much more complicated than that. Yes. But it also has so much more beautiful and complicated and messy positive outcomes from it too, if you can really provide those foundations. And so that's where our work has sort of shifted over time, and recognize that we have something that, we need to really understand who our producers are and how we help them where they are.
Yeah. Awesome. Evan, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, it's so funny hearing you say that, Taylor, about the infrastructure, and just tacking on to what Stacy said. We have a direct example of our property with the City of Fort Collins. At first, we were told we were not going to be able to keep the cattle there over winter because the assumption was we would have a feedlot. And so it was, for us, it was very shocking, like this idea of, what? Like, what do you mean we would have a feedlot? Because we very much, first of all, we're 100% grass fed. Like, we try to graze as long into the winter as possible as we can. When we feed hay, we feed it, cattle producers will be familiar. You don't just feed it in one spot, like you go down the field. But it came to this point where it was like, they don't know that, these are literally individuals with, and they're great people and they're very smart people, obviously, but they just lacked that context of what that could look like. And so it took us both directly advocating to the city and also telling Stacy so that she could support us as well, and saying what you said, that we don't have property to take them to in the winter. We're not landowners. We don't have a fallback. Like, this is only going to work for us if they can be here in the winter. And, something that will always stick with me is someone came back and said, well, we could easily put a different cattle producer here who would be okay with that. And, I kind of put on my equity hat for a second and said, you got to be careful when you say things like that to producers like me, because I'm a Latina woman. I'm a first generation at this, and I don't benefit from intergenerational wealth and land ownership, and that can be a really harmful frame of mind, I think. And I said that, and I was very just like direct and kind in the way I said it, but I did say, like, if you're not willing to invest in people and communities, we're never going to get to a more equitable agricultural, space as a community, because the highest bidder or the most flexible producer is just going to continue the story we've always been telling. And so, I appreciate you bringing that up, Taylor, that part of this work is really educating as well those folks who are the landholders that those infrastructure needs, they have to be there for some folks to even be able to begin.
And your story, Evan, had such power and really did change the dynamics of that conversation.
Yeah, no, they were like shook, literally. They were like, whoa, oh wow, we didn't realize. And I'm like, yes, no, you did not, but thank you for listening. And like, it was, like I said, a very powerful moment for me, because like they understand it now from a way that they didn't before. And I hear them continuing to understand it that way in follow-up conversations, 6 months later, which is so cool, because it's like, wow, I did something for my community, and felt supported by Stacy and the community farms in doing so.
Yeah, Evan, I want to talk a little bit more about your work at Young Farmers. We've had quite a few guests from Young Farmers on this podcast, but I'd love to just dive into real quickly, like, what is your work as the Western Organizing Manager? I know you do a lot of advocacy. So yeah, if you want to just briefly describe, like, what is your work off the farm?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I would say my role is really, I connect the grassroots, being the farmers on the ground, with these valuable stories to tell and these experiences that they carry with them every day. And I connect them to the grass tops, being spaces in the room where they're talking with people in positions of power to be able to change these large overarching structures that we all operate within. So, we do a lot of work on federal policy, and with it being a farm bill year, we have literally flown 100 farmers to DC to like run around between 6 meetings on the Hill in one day just to tell their story, because again and again, when we're meeting with these senators, with these members of Congress, with their staff, they're learning from us and they're hearing us. And it really is coming to fruition. Without getting too nitty gritty into policy, we have seen multiple marker bills, which are, essentially on their way to becoming legislation. And in this farm bill, because of the advocacy of farmers in Colorado and in the West. And I am just so infinitely proud and humbled to be able to meet these folks and hear their stories and be just like a conduit for them to be able to give power to their stories. So my whole goal, outside of my ranching, is to help the people who deal with the things like me change the things that are happening. And one really concrete example I'd love to share is right now we have a marker bill that it's called the Lasso Act. And essentially what it would do is create $100 million of annual revolving funding for organizations like Poudre Valley Community Farms, or it's quite flexible actually, any organization that's working on land access to have this funding stream to apply for from the federal government. So it's just really exciting to see, wow, this could really be something that folks can count on and rely on to have as an opportunity.
Very cool. Yeah. And Evan, we're working on a career fair and a networking social together at the Regenerate conference. And this podcast is going out with enough time that folks can still be a part of that. So do you want to say a little bit about that and invite our guests?
Oh, absolutely. Oh my gosh. I'm so excited to see so many of you here at the conference. I love Santa Fe. I have family roots in New Mexico. It's going to be so good to be there. But yeah, we're having two events. The social event is at the same time as the career fair, like Taylor said. Young Farmers is going to be sponsoring that event. So please come out. It's going to be free. There will be a cash bar, but there will be free food and you can come out and say hi. And we're going to have a table as well. So if you're like, wow, I'm kind of curious what it looks like to take the next steps to be a leader or to like share my story in these ways, we will be there and we would love to connect with you and just get to know you. And then also we're going to be having a roundtable that's really focused on hearing from different people throughout the West who have these similar stories of creative land and water access solutions so that we can learn from one another. And especially for those of you who are new to the game, right? And you're kind of looking for the door to put your foot in. Hearing from others is oftentimes the best way to generate your own ideas and plan of action of what you might do. Because as much as I would love to say, you're all going to be able to get a mortgage and buy some land, like we know that is so hard right now. But that being said, it's not impossible to get on the land. And it's going to be a space at our roundtable where we can hear from individuals who are doing it and doing it in creative ways to learn from one another.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. And if folks if they're interested in coming to the Regenerate conference, it's the first week of November. It's down in Santa Fe. And if you need help paying for it, we have a beginning farmer and student discount. So if you go to the website, you can find that and you can always reach out to the podcast. We'll connect you with the right folks. But yeah, and lastly, I just wanted to give you two an opportunity to just tell our audience, how can someone listening support your work? So Stacy, if you want to go first, I know, grassroots projects, you guys are converting to a nonprofit and sort of gaining a lot of steam. How can folks help you do that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways. Certainly, if there are producers listening who are interested who have that mentality we've been talking about, that flexibility, that sort of relationship focus, who are interested in farming in Northern Colorado, reach out. Our website is poudrevalleycommunityfarms.com. And there's a contact us button there. So we always want to build our family and know that we've got folks who are interested. The other thing is sharing what you've heard here today. We're doing really good work in this community. We're making real progress, and being able to have other people know about it is really important. And then the third piece is that it costs money to do this work. And that money goes to the relationship piece. It goes to the human part of this work. And increasingly is going to infrastructure to support producers like Evan and others who are trying to really build these long-term community-based businesses, here in Northern Colorado. And there is also a way to donate to support our work on our website. We'll be having a number of fundraising events over the next year, which will also be listed on our website. But yeah, those are sort of the three big ways: is help share the word, get involved. We've got a ton of volunteer opportunities if you're here in Northern Colorado, and then, be willing to put, if you're one of those folks who's someone who enjoys food, right? Especially, like, put your money where your mouth is, and be a part of solutions like this, PVCF or otherwise, in your own community. Like, really invest in these people that are making a difference in terms of the land, health of the land, and feeding our communities.
And Evan, if you want to jump into how can folks help you and your business specifically and in your work in young farmers?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely going to echo what Stacy said. From the business side of it, it's so important that we consider food at the value of what went into it. And so often, I am so grateful that we have a customer base of folks who really care about, where that beef came from. And also, let's be honest, how it tastes, because it tastes so much better when it's an actual beef animal Hereford grazed at like high elevation on that good Colorado grass. Like, it does not get better. So certainly supporting our business, sharing the word, buying local, that's always important. And then from the young farmers side of things, the coalition is all about collectivism and power in numbers and power in stories. And so if you care about a more climate conscious farming future, a more equitable farming future, and a future of agriculture where young farmers like us don't have to face some of these structural barriers that right now we're all dealing with, I highly recommend you follow us on social media. We've got an Instagram page. We've got a Facebook. We've got all the things. I would say to subscribe to our newsletter and consider joining the coalition. It's $1 for a year of membership, and you get access to all sorts of goodie codes and things like that too. But yeah, and then also, you can always reach out to me personally. It's evan@youngfarmers.org. If you want to know more about that work or really anything, I'm always happy to meet new people, talk to new people, and get to hear what you're doing too. So yeah, and just thank you again, Taylor and Quivira. So grateful to have people like you doing this work and partners like you in the West.
I want to thank both of you so much for joining us today and for sharing your stories, and hope we can support you and partner up in the future. So just want to say thank you so much for being on today.
Oh, Taylor, thanks for giving us the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Taylor. Thank you, Stacy.
Thanks for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this episode, please jump on to the platform you use to listen to podcasts and leave us a rating, a review, and subscribe to our show. It really does help others find us, and we sincerely appreciate it. Do you have a speaker or topic to recommend for a future episode? Just email me at taylor@quiviracoalition.org. taylor@quiviracoalition.org. And you may notice we're switching up our podcast structure here today. While we usually do job announcements near the end, we're actually working on a swanky job board that will be live this winter. In the meantime, please subscribe to our newsletter at our main webpage and to receive thoughtful writing, community updates, and job and event opportunities coming up. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to Regeneration Rising, a podcast production of the Quivira Coalition. Find us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, and other popular podcast platforms. Become a Patreon supporter by visiting quiviracoalition.org/podcasts. We'd like to thank Quivira staff for their contributions to this podcast. This episode was edited and engineered by Caleb Wenzel-Fisher. Wanderlust, our theme music, was made by Scott Buckley. And we're grateful for our guests taking the time to talk with us about their experiences. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the land.